Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the NPC Sports Podcast. Again, we are one down with Logan handling some familial issues, but
Feels like one up. Feels
that's true. And also, we're so
addition by
used,
subtraction.
yeah, we're so used to operating without him at this point. It's the Ewing theory, if anything. But how are you doing today, Dakota?
I'm good. I just had your classic like homeowner meltdown where I had a very small window to mow the lawn, find turn it on, realize the carburetor and spark plug need to be all cleaned and fixed or replaced. And so I worked on yard work for like 3 hours and did absolutely nothing. Accomplished absolutely none of it. Made zero progress and got really annoyed. Um, so maybe some of that grumpiness will carry over into this episode.
Excellent. That is the worst feeling. That at least if you get to the point and it's like, well, I accomplished something, you could take solace in that. But yeah, when you realize no progress has been made, you're like, man, this is what a waste of my life.
I got one line on the lawn. Didn't have time to go over and get a new spark plug. Like literally, aside from the one line on the lawn, no progress. So it was a rough morning.
Oh, jeez. Well, at least you did some work. You know, you're willingly stepping up and fulfilling your duties as a homeowner and as a working American. Um, Someone who's possibly not fulfilling all their duties as a working American, and we'll get into my feelings on that momentarily, is Rafael Devers. He is still hacking away as the designated hitter, but a recent injury, devastating injury to Tristan Casas, which is likely going to cost him yet another substantial amount of time on a season, has created a vacancy at first base, to be very kind. That's led obviously to calls for Rafael Devers to move to first base, which was something that was always kind of assumed is probably too strong a word, but urged after the Alex Bregman signing. And it sounds like not only have there not been any conversations to that effect, it sounds like they're not even entertaining conversations to that effect, either on the player side or the manager side or the team side. There's a lot of problems that I have with this entire situation, but I will let you go first and see if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I don't. The thing is, it's still a situation where I don't know enough. Like, is it that Rafael Devers is truly just like rejecting it outright, or is it that the Red Sox don't want to? If it's the Red Sox just as much, like they don't want to do it because you also like it creates a potential weird outcome where he plays first base all season, and then next year you basically have a redo of what happened this spring, where they're like, "Hey, we know you were passable there, but you're the DH again because we went out and signed or traded for whoever," and then he's pissed all over again. So I could see a situation where the Red Sox are like, we've made this bet. He's a DH. We're not messing with it. Maybe they just don't think he'd be able to. He would the learning curve would be too steep, and he would be a disaster over at first base. I think people too often think that it's like you just put someone over there and they can figure it out. And the thing that annoys me is like those same people that say just give Roman Anthony a first baseman, give Trevor Story, give Rafael Devers a first baseman, are the same people that killed the Red Sox for just giving Bobby Dalbec a first baseman and watching him really struggle and saying, well, this is play dumb games, win dumb prizes. You can't just put anybody over there. So you can't just do that. So I think there's a case to be made that at least in the short term, what they're doing right now is the best path with Romy Gonzalez and whoever they have platooning with him. Um, but that said, I do think that it feels inevitable that he will eventually go over there because I just don't know what other solution they have. Like, I think cooler heads eventually will prevail one way or the other because to me, there are only two ways through this unless they go sign a veteran or trade for a veteran, and that is Devers or Trevor Story. Like, and I don't even like the idea of putting Trevor Story over there. I think that's a weird fit too. But I just don't really know what other path they have other than going out and making an addition, which I don't know if they want to do that just yet, unless it's for someone like Dom Smith. So I just think they're in a weird spot, and I don't know if there's any clean solution, and I certainly don't think the cleanest solution is having Meyer or Anthony do it. I think that's the worst idea, and I think people that are suggesting that are stupid.
All
Really
right.
stupid.
Tell us how you really feel. So, um, I will. I was going to get to this later. I would love to see Christian Campbell at first base. I know that that is hard timing for him, seeing as he just came up. But he's got the size. He's got his money. He doesn't have to worry about the fact that right-handed hitting first basemen are incredibly devalued in in MLB nowadays. So I would like to see that, especially because it opens up second base for the inevitable arrival of Marcelo Mayer. So that is my hope for, if not by the end of this season, coming out of next season, because I I'm not convinced that Casas is. I don't mean like when I say I'm not convinced he's coming back. I don't mean like he'll never play baseball again. I don't know that I don't know that the ship on Casas has not sailed, um, as a actual fulcrum of the Red Sox. I think he's kind of getting in. I think he's gotten now with this injury into the realm of I just don't know. It probably ain't gonna ever happen. For the last 3 years, we've been basing a lot on half a season in 2023 and saying it once he figures out, once he stays healthy, all these sorts of things. And you can only fool me so many times before I start to say, you know what, I don't know if I can count on this anymore. And with if I was putting together my dream scenario for the Red Sox, he gone, goodbye. If I was putting together my dream scenario for the Red Sox, it would be 2026 Campbell first, Mayer second, assuming Story is still here, Story at short, and Bregman at third if I'm doing my infield. So that is when you say, I don't see another answer, that's what I would prefer to be the answer, allowing for the fact that I don't think there's a snowball's chance in hell that Alex Cora is going to have the managerial courage to make that call.
Yeah, sorry, my wife is napping, so when my cat opens the door, like it just did, I have to run to shut the door so I don't piss off my wife.
Cat.
Um, but yeah, I think on Cassis, I think if nothing else, like I find it hard to envision him like playing first base next year, at least even that much, just because he's already slow. Um, I do think he's a better first baseman than people give him credit for, but I just think like he's probably a DH now, or at least next year when he comes back. Like it makes the most sense to have him DH and not spend that much time on his knee. I mean, patella tendon's a serious injury, and I know Cole Strange just came back from it in football, which is probably even harder. But different sports, different athletes, right? Um, and so, I mean, if he's not going to DH for the Red Sox next year unless they trade Rafael Devers, right? Maybe you just swap them. Maybe Cassis is the DH and Devers is the first baseman. It's a possibility. But I'm just with you. Like I I've I am like team Tristan Cassis. I've always I really wasn't that worried about the slump he got off to at the start of this year. That half season you mentioned, it really was a full season except for 1 month, and then he got hurt. So like I think there's I don't know. I know I could go either way on it. I understand why some people don't believe in him. I think that's really them just sort of leaning more into like his personality quirks. I think the people that don't like Tristan Cassis don't want to like Tristan Cassis. Um, which like I don't know. I like weird people. I don't have any issue with him. And not to say he's weird. I just think he's his own person. But I just think there's this weird undercurrent of people rooting for Tristan Cassis to fail or to move on, where like I just don't get that. Not saying that's you. That is something that bothers me. But as far as like the what they should do, I do agree. Like I could see the Christian Campbell thing. I just think the Red Sox are really reluctant to throw extra variables on the plates of Campbell, Meyer, and Anthony. Of the three, it does seem like Campbell could maybe handle the best because Despite Tony Mass saying he wasn't ready for the big leagues, I think he was like too ready for the big leagues. Like, I don't know if I've seen a young player come up and seem more ready for the big leagues than what Christian Campbell's looked like over the first month and a half or so. So I do think he could handle it. But I just, I think they're committed to not screwing with these guys. Maybe it's, PTSD from Blake Swihart and the stuff like that went wrong. But beyond that, I just think everybody is in such a rush to bring up Anthony Meyer, and I understand. I just don't know how the roster math works. Like, I think this is a thing that doesn't get talked about enough. Where I don't like everyone says, call up Anthony. I know I'm moving him to a different position on the team now, but they say call up Anthony and make Cedar Rafaela the super utility guy. And you have Anthony Duran, William Abreu. Okay, you do that. So who do you remove from the roster in that situation? It's not Romy Gonzalez because he's good, first of all, and he's like sort of your top depth first baseman. He's your starting first baseman right now. It's not Rob Refsnyder. He's one of the best in baseball at that kind of specific role. You need the right-handed hitter, outfielder that can crush lefties. And it's not going to be David Hamilton. Because despite what we think about David Hamilton, there have been some credible reports that the Red Sox turned down some big trade offers for him this offseason. And I do think, he can play second and short. I think he's a better hitter than Rafaela. He's fast. Like, I think he's here to stay. So I just don't know who you remove from the roster. I think maybe the answer is you trade one of Rafaela or Hamilton, but regardless, I don't like either of those things. It's a weird path. So I just think, people calling malpractice for the Red Sox not promoting Anthony Meyer. I just think I don't know how they do it because I don't know how they accommodate Anthony, and then for Meyer, you have Trevor Story, and as much as people want to bag on Trevor Story, he's not a player that you're putting on the bench right now. So I just don't know. I don't know what they do because they have an obvious way to bring up one of them right now because Tristan Casas going down. You can make that work, but both of them, I don't know how they get there without making a really tough decision with the roster.
The roster math is why Devers to first base makes so much sense. Because Roman Anthony to first base, to me, if you propose that, you're not a serious person. He's an outfielder. He's an outfielder. He
might
played,
be a starting center fielder.
Yeah,
probably not, but he might be.
Well, and having a guy who is an outfielder change at that stage in his career, to me is far less realistic than having either a second baseman so far in Campbell or a third baseman in Devers, who have played infield to this point in the major leagues successfully. I mean, I know we don't think Devers has any great shakes defensively, but he's successfully played third base for full seasons. So the Roman Anthony to first base, I don't take seriously whatsoever. But Devers playing first base addresses so many of those issues that you're talking about, because Devers being able to play first base then creates the possibility that you can get a Yoshida into the lineup as a DH, and that makes you better hitting there. It creates the opportunity for Anthony to play center, potentially, Rafaela to split time between center field and shortstop or second base. It creates an opportunity for Mayer to fill in somewhere in the infield. It creates, obviously, at-bats at DH for Campbell and Anthony. It addresses so many of those problems. And, one thing with the Devers timeline that's always kind of tweaked me is there's the narrative is that Devers was upset about the Red Sox signing Bregman, so he showed up to camp out of shape, and it's been kind of a struggle for him to rebound since then. The timeline doesn't work there because Bregman, if I recall, was signed mid-February. And the players
like 2 days before spring training.
Right. So you can't get out of shape. You can't fall out of shape in 2 days, even if you're Rafael Devers. That is a winter-long commitment to falling out of shape. So regardless of what they had done in free agency at the third base position, Rafael Devers was going to show up out of shape. And if anything, he was fortunate that they signed Alex Bregman so that we didn't have to watch him fall over himself for the first 2 months of the season. So that's kind of my thing when I look at Devers is like, no, this was not like a pouting of them signing someone to his position. This was someone who was just out of shape. And then when they made this move, it almost gave like a cover for why he was out of shape. He was always going to be out of shape. And that is really my number one concern with the first base thing is it's like, will he physically be able to do it? Because I'm not sure he can physically play the field. So there is that with kind of the team's reluctance to do so. There is that undercurrent of maybe Cora is worried about him embarrassing himself and he's trying to protect him from that. But for me, that's all the more reason to get him working out over there. It's almost like hey, not only do we want to get you back on the field, not only do we want to, potentially help you become a leader on the team, but we're also not going to tell you. We're also hoping you'll just kind of like work out.
Yeah. But the thing is, even if they do it, even if it is Devers at first base, it's not going to happen, right? Like, it's going to take a little bit before they actually put him there. I mean, even if they start having him take ground balls like tomorrow or today, like realistically, how long till he starts there? Like a few weeks, a month? Like, I don't know if they would feel comfortable just throwing him out there. So I think the problem's going to persist for a while. Um, and one more thought on the roster math. I think what's another interesting angle of this is that, this is kind of why I didn't like the Ceddanne Rafaela extension when it happened and I do think like he's been better this year than his numbers suggest. But regardless, like you can make a case at multiple points for sending him back down to the minors. With especially early in the year with how bad his chase rate was, like he was a demotable bat. But you can't demote a guy like that who you gave like a 70 million extension to last year. I mean, I know like we say like just do it, like whatever, you got to field the best lineup or the best team, but like the teams don't do that. You don't give the guy that extension, a young player with promise that extension, and then send him back down. So I think they're just kind of stuck. And so like I don't know what the answer is. I think Devers going over is the best solution. I don't know if it's going to happen. I personally like Story going over there, call up Meyer. You have Rafaela, spell him against lefties because I do think, Marcelo Meyer's still not very good against lefties. He's been better this year, but regardless, it's an obvious spot for Rafaela to get some time at shortstop if they want to put him there. And then I think probably you have to look at trading David Hamilton. I think that's the only way it works to getting both of those guys up this year is if one of Rafaela, Hamilton, or Raul Bresnider are eventually off the roster or hurt. Right, an injury could solve the problem. But save that, I think you got to trade one of those guys. And to me, it's probably Hamilton. Though I would maybe strongly consider trading Rafaela just because, I don't know. I don't know if he's ever going to be better than he is right now as a hitter. So I would, I think his value is still high. So I don't know. I know it's kind of like a meandering way of looking at it. I just think they are in such an awkward spot, and there is an element of manipulating the service time. I don't think they want Roman Anthony to come up and win Rookie of the Year because then he gets an accrued season of service time. And for a guy who could make a lot of money, that's tough. Fans don't like to hear that, but that's the way baseball operates. So there's a lot of factors in play here. And I just think that it'll be interesting to see how they solve it because I think they have to solve it sooner rather than later, especially if they keep floundering as they are now.
My last thing on Devers that I'll say is Kevin Millar got around to making a good point. Or I think he was trying to make a good point. He was trying to make a point that I think had its basis in a good point on the broadcast on Tuesday night, which is where he said, this is a job. And I do think that as a fan, as someone who, if you pay a lot of money to watch the Red Sox on TV, to go to the game, Rafael Devers not playing first base is offensive on some level. It's whether it's him refusing to play there or the Red Sox not making him do that, or at least approaching him and working with him to do that. when you consider the money is a cliche, but when you consider what it would do to improve the product that your audience, your fans, is paying to consume, and the team and the player are not doing it, I can see how that would be offensive to an observer.
Yeah.
And it's something that leads to disgust. It's something that leads to declining ratings. It's something that leads to declining interest. Um, like my 13-year-old daughter was even like she hasn't disliked a professional athlete in her life, but even she the other day was like, I like why it why is Rafael Devers being so selfish? And it's like, wow, like once you start losing the 12, 13 year olds, like come on, man.
Yeah. And that is true. And especially when you get into like how much money they're making, right?
Right,
It's
you
like,
like almost are loath to bring it up because it's like, oh, okay, yeah, okay, that's the
well, it is
cliche, but
fair.
like it is. It's
We're
like
all on one planet. Like we're allowed to have feelings about when all of us are trying to make ends meet, and then a guy
right.
making $400 million like can't be bothered to try an easier position, right? Like
Especially because
you
like David Ortiz, even he would put on a first baseman's mitt when they would play interleague. You
yeah.
know what I mean? I
Yeah.
that and that guy's the greatest designated hitter who ever lived.
Well, and so it kind of makes me think of the episode we had over a month ago about you know let's see what this Dever storyline looks like next offseason because I was saying then like I could totally see a trade happening. Like I don't know,
Mhm.
I wouldn't do it because he is like there's a world in which he's like the second best hitter in Red Sox history, right? Depending on if he maxes out. But like I just don't, and a lot can change between now and then. But it just there's a lot of bad juju around it right now, and it just I don't know. It just seems like we're heading toward that kind of outcome. But I do wonder like things have also changed since that episode, right? Where now you can't feel good about Tristan Cassis becoming supplementing that kind of power. Like you're thinking like, well, we could consider, you can envision a world where Rafael Devers is gone if Roman Anthony comes up and is like best young player in baseball and Tristan Cassis is finally turning into the 35, 40 homer guy. But now you're taking Cassis off the board a little bit. Or you're like, well, we might get Vlad Guerrero Jr. Next offseason, right? So we can talk about getting rid of Devers because you got maybe Vlad Jr. and all these prospects coming up. Now Vlad Jr. is off the board too. So I don't know. You could be hurting the team maybe too much now if you entertain training Devers or trading Devers. But I just think the fan sentiment is what it is. I don't know how happy he is here anymore. I don't know how much Cora likes having him around anymore. Um, Unless it just isn't nearly as bad as we think it is. Which I always allow for that possibility. But the tea leaves just aren't good. And so I keep wondering about what this looks like next winter if they start looking at trading him.
Yeah, I mean that's a good kind of move into the other general Red Sox thought for this episode is whether it's because of Devers or the struggles in general, the injuries, there just does not seem to be a huge it, it the team something seems off with the team. And yeah, that goes with not being very good. Um but one thing that it's similar to a thought that I had about the Celtics that I think I've shared before. But a concern I have with the Red Sox is the players who actually know how to play. And I don't mean like know how to pitch and know how to hit, but how to like play the game are not the ones who came through the Red Sox system. And that's concerning to me. And I'm talking about like knowing where to throw on the relay from the outfield, like knowing not to swing on a steal when your teammate is stealing a base, like these sorts of like trying to take an extra base when the situation does not call for it whatsoever. Like these are things like playing the sport things. And the only guys on the team that I think are good at it are Wilyer Abreu, who came up through the Astro system, did not come up through the Red Sox system. Alex Bregman, obviously. I even think Trevor Story. I think Trevor Story like knows those situations.
Yeah.
And the other one who when he's in there, I give him credit for knowing how to play his position is and knowing how to hit is Rob Refsnyder. And the rest of those like and to me like that's something that yeah, it's on Cora when you're making these little mistakes, because he's the manager. But I also just wonder, it's like, why do we not know how to play the game?
Yeah, I can see that. I do wonder, part of it is I think they are a young team. Um, you can
Yeah,
only run
William
that excuse
Abreu's
for so
pretty young
long.
though.
Yeah, yeah, no, right. And I think he's legit. I do think so. Some of it might be that they're young, but some of it I just think is maybe a byproduct of how much they jerk these guys around in the minors. You know, you not. I don't think I haven't seen anything that Christian Campbell doesn't know how to play the game. But you look at Christian Campbell; it's a guy who, last year Marcelo Meyer gets hurt and they put him at shortstop instead of having him focus on second base, where he clearly that's his future position. And then they also had him messing around with left and center. Spring training, he played like all four. We've talked about Devers, right? Now they're moving him over to DH. David Hamilton was a shortstop and a third baseman. Now he's playing second. I don't know again if he fits into the category you're saying, but again, it's a guy they jerked around a lot. Duran was a second baseman uh, until he got to Double A, I think. Then they put him in center. He was bad. Put him in left. He was a disaster when he came up defensively and moved him around more. Now he's all right. Rafaela was doing shortstop and center. Then last year he focused almost like most of the time on shortstop because of injuries. Now he's back in center field. Um, Connor Wong moved around a lot in the minors. He's different, right? But I'm just saying this. They mess around with guys developmentally a lot in the minors, and you wonder if that translates to learning too many learning experiences when they're up in the majors. And to bring it kind of full circle, maybe that's why they are reluctant to messing around with Anthony and Meyer with this whole first base thing,
Yeah,
where they're like, we need to have these guys focused developmentally on a position because the learning curves and the inexperience show too often when they get up here.
yeah,
Um, you know, I might be making too much of an excuse for him there because at the end of the day, I do think there's something to what you're saying where, it's been a lot of ugly baseball under Cora the last few years. I do think he's an excellent in-game manager. He's maybe one of the best playoff managers in the game, though we haven't been able to see it in a while. Um, but there's been a lot of sloppy, dumb play since he's been in charge, and at some point, like it has to reflect on him.
yeah. Yeah, no, Rafaela is a very good microcosm of what I'm talking about. Also, Wong too. Like Rafaela physically can play anywhere. Like the guy is so amazingly skilled, but he doesn't know how to play center field fully. If that makes any sense. Like he'll make the amazing catch, but like he doesn't have that instinctual thing of like what you got to do next. So it leads to batters, runners taking extra bases. That's the kind of stuff they wouldn't have to take. Wong is another one. Like I think Wong has incredible bat to ball skills for a catcher, but still there'll be situations where it's like whether they're trying to put hit and runs on or the few times that like it makes sense to bunt, and it just seems like they're not able to fully take advantage of those skills that he has. So
You know,
yeah, I mean it leads to again just like tough situations, and when you're losing the amount of close games that they do, a couple outs a game, a couple bases a game, they really get magnified in the win-loss record.
you know, I don't think anybody's talked about this. Why isn't Connor Wong being considered more for first base? Um, just because I think so. I'm looking at it right now. He played 14 games at first last season. Made two errors. Like I'm not going to sit here and tell you I have the advanced data on how he was at first and his DRS and everything. But we're talking about a guy who can play catcher, second. He played in the outfield last year too. He's played third once. I gotta imagine he's got the ability to play first. And with Carlos Narvaez again, like sort of emerging, I think as a legitimate catching option. Like to maybe he deserves to play more than Connor Wong behind the plate because he's that good defensively. Um, maybe having Connor Wong move over there and platoon with Romy Gonzalez. I know again it's two righties, so it's not great. But I just from a defensive standpoint, um, I don't know why no one's brought that up. Maybe there's an obvious reason that I'm not thinking of, but like I would consider it.
Yeah, although a lot of Wong's value originates from the fact that he is a catcher.
Right.
So
But he's a
his
good hitter too. I mean,
yeah, I
he's a
mean, I
good
just
hitter.
think his offensive impact as a first baseman would not be quite as pronounced as it is when he's catching.
Right.
I also have no time for the narrative that he's like a terrible defensive catcher. It seems, I think to go back to what I was saying before about you're not a serious person. When people are like, oh, he stinks. Like, he does not stink. He's a absolutely average major league catcher who happens to have an above average catcher bat. And so I think that an even or split time with Narvaez is definitely warranted. But then it is tough because then when you got a catcher who's not catching that day, you kind of want that catcher to like be resting rather than playing a position where they're in on every single play, every single ball that gets put in play.
This is a bit of a tangent, but I do one thing that I experienced the ABS system for the first time in person last week. I went to Worcester. Um, and have you been to a game yet and seen it in action?
Mm.
It's awesome. Like it has to like be instituted mid-season in the majors. It's so fast. Like the call. The umpire makes the call, and like right away he turns around and says the catcher is challenging, and you look up at the screen, and it's like the tennis thing where it just shows you, or like how we all look the square behind the plate like on MLB.com, and then right there, then the turns and says call is confirmed or not. It takes like 5 seconds. And so I say all that to say that someone like Connor Wong, who I think is considered below average from a framing standpoint, and that's like a big metric for teams is how they're framing. I wonder how ABS eventually will impact that. Like, do you care as much about a catcher's framing skills when we are heading towards an automatic balls and strike system? Would Connor Wong then have better value, or would the onus on having a catcher be good defensively not be as high, and you would want them to be a better hitter? Like, would that threshold for offensive catching raise? Like, I just wonder how that's going to sort of manifest over the next 3 or 4 years. But in the near term, yeah, obviously he's not like a perfect offensive fit for first base, but I could talk myself into him making more sense than Trevor Story again if the Devers thing is off the table, which who knows.
Yeah. Okay.
I will
Listen.
just say one on the
Yeah, go
on the Malays thing about the Red
ahead.
Sox real quick. I was looking at it, and oh, where'd I go? So, and again, they should not be below 500 right now. They're underachieving for sure, but I it is early and these things can change. And so I mean, I was just looking at it, and last year on June 11th, the Red Sox were 33 and 34. Which was not good. And then less than a month later, they were 10 games over 500, and we were all talking about like, wow, it's good. Like it's easy to forget that now because the vibe down the stretch wasn't great and
Didn't
they
they have
fell
three
apart.
All Stars last year?
Duran, Hauk,
Duran
and
and Jansen.
right, yeah,
Yeah.
and they were a good team. Like they were right near for they were in a playoff spot there before the trade deadline. Then they fell apart, but remember how good people were feeling about the team in July heading up to that. Like they were a really good feel good story in town. You're like, wow, like they're ahead of schedule. This is great. When as recently as June 11th, they were under 500. So these things can change in a hurry. I think they're too talented to not eventually go on a hot streak. Like they haven't had a hot streak yet. I think they won 5 in a row, but it was like a weird 5 in a row. It was sandwiched between two like 4 game losing streaks. Um, but I think they're too good to not at some point here rattle off like 9 out of 10, and then we'll forget about this. But you know, it's got to happen sooner rather than later. I think it's within the next month they have to sort of really show that ability that we're talking about.
Fair. Sometime within the next month, because they will probably be vying for eyeballs with the Boston fighting Celtics, who they're fighting with the New York Knicks right now in the playoffs, and they dropped game one, obviously. Um, on the Celtics, I think they're going to end up comfortably winning the series against New York. The whole point of the 3-pointer whatever you want to call it, is that you're going to have games where they don't fall, but over the course of 7 game series or 82 games regular season, it all evens out once they start falling. Um, However, I I do think, similar to what I was saying with the Red Sox, it is a concern for me that the Celtics players who know how to play the game did not come up in the Celtics system. Because what was the big play at the end of game one that even gave them a chance to win that game? It was Derek White's rebound, uh, defensive rebound over, I think, Cat. And I know, like, being out toughing Cat is not an accomplishment, but he's still given up what, like 7 inches. What was the play that saved the Celtics season against the Miami Heat last year? The obviously Derek White's offensive rebound. Um, we also go to Al Horford. Al Horford is obviously a pro's pro. He knows how to play the game. And again, I just look at these
Drew
little
Holiday.
Drew Holiday. Obviously, like, you look at these little plays, and these things matter in the playoffs. We've seen them matter. The White play last year, against the Heat, is a perfect example. Like that. That's one of the all-time heroic plays, and that's not something that you can draw up. That's not something you can like register in a training video or whatever it might be. And are they the reason that the Celtics are championship contenders? No, it's Brown and Tatum, obviously, but it is something that it looms a lot larger when these games matter, and having the ability to make those plays or not are the difference between winning a playoff game, losing a playoff game, winning a series or losing a series, or rescuing you at the last moment, as Derek White did against the Miami Heat.
Yeah, I do think that's a fair point. I mean, but it's also like, I don't know. I'm just so bored is maybe the wrong word. I just don't know what else to say about them at this point. Like, they have so many stretches where they just play such dumb basketball, or what we all simpletons look at and think that has to be dumb basketball. And then after the game, Joe Mazzulla says, I liked our shot process." And then 10 hours later, Chris Forsberg puts out a tweet that says, according to the NBA's data tracking, the Celtics were 4 feet open or more on 45 of the 63s. And I'm like, I guess I'm stupid. So never mind, forget it. So I just don't know. I'm so tired of the topic of complaining about their threes. I don't know where to go with it. But the turnovers and just the bad situational basketball, that sort of transcends coaches now. Like, that happened a little under Stevens. It happened under Udoka. It's happening under Joe Mazzulla. So I do think, to your point, like, they're just, sometimes they do play a boneheaded brand of basketball. But I just think ultimately they're too talented and too good for it to matter all that much over the course of a 7 game series. What I'm far more concerned about, and why I think they are legitimately vulnerable, is, like, I think this Jaylen Brown thing and the domino effect from it is huge, because if I don't think teams are worried about him right now. Like, if he's just basically Dwayne Wade, just mid-range jumpers at this point, because of his knee, you live with that. And then if Porzingis isn't out there, or Porzingis is kind of like in and out because of that sickness, teams are just gonna, like, blitz Tatum, or put their best defender on him, and he's got this wrist clearly is bugging him. And I just don't know, like, unless it's one of these games where he goes crazy, I think that leaves them really, really exposed. And they're especially with Porzingis out, they're in a situation now where they got to play Al Horford too much, because you can't spell him for too long with someone like Luke Cornett, and then have the Knicks have Cornett switched on to Jalen Brunson in the fourth quarter. So you have to overplay Al Horford. And so, you got to manage Drew Holiday a little bit, because you need him at his best against Brunson and Halliburton and whoever comes out of the West. So I just think, you could manage those things if Jaylen Brown was healthy and at his best, because him and Tatum together are so good. But with him limited, so much of the offensive pressure is on Tatum, and then you're less able to manage the minutes of everybody else because you need your best lineup out there to compensate for one of your stars being limited. So I mean, I still think they're going to be fine against the Knicks, but like I'm definitely more entertaining like Eastern Conference exit more than I was a few weeks ago. I think I didn't take the Jaylen Brown thing seriously, and I just don't think that's going to get any better.
Yeah, that's the thing about depth, right? Is we've been talking about their depth all year, but depth depth gets challenged really quickly once you start to have injuries and those sorts
Yeah,
of
Peyton
things.
Pritchard they clearly think is unplayable in those spots. So it's like,
Yes,
you know,
Pritchard is a perfect example. I mean, was he sixth man this year or most improved player?
six man.
Yeah, sixth man of the year. And I know you kind of get labeled a hater if you're like, yeah, Peyton Pritchard's okay. And goes, oh, he's great. When the other four guys on the floor are either current or former All Stars, the defense has to let somebody get the shots, and so he gets the shots. But once you have a hobbled Brown, you have Porzingis, you have an aging Al Horford. Especially in the playoffs, the defense can key on him a lot, and his turnover, either in overtime or the fourth quarter, when he went into the lane and just got hounded, like that was bad. Like you have to realize, like you're Peyton Pritchard. You're not going to go and outmuscle three very large men in a NBA playoff game, in crunch time there, and they fell down and he lost the ball and all that. And it's like one of those, like, yeah, like they have a lot of depth, but once that sixth man now has to operate as a fourth or a third man, you realize the difference between those two roles.
Yeah, and when you short, yeah, and every team has to shorten their lineups in the playoffs. Like that just happens. No team is rolling with the same depth in the playoffs as they did in the regular season. But it's just a problem when you shorten that lineup, and then that shortened lineup includes, a couple guys who you're always managing in Holiday and Porzingis, not one guy who's almost 40 or is 40, whatever Al Horford is, and then another guy, Jaylen Brown, who clearly is only at 60%. Like, that's too many issues in a shortened lineup. That, like, again, I think they can survive it to the Eastern Conference Finals, but like I think they're definitely vulnerable. And I am a Jason Tatum defender, like as much as the next guy. But at the end of the day, I question whether he's good enough to carry like a hobbled and sort of vulnerable team all the way, like just basically on him by himself. I don't know quite if he has that in him, especially if like his shot's not falling. So I don't know. That game, I'm probably overreacting. I mean, like Cleveland just went down 0-2. The Nuggets lost game one. Celtics lost a game to the Cavs last year, and then they trounced the rest of the way. But it's like, I don't know. I think there was a lot of stuff in that game that should make people concerned.
That is the funny thing is as much as that one loss can raise concern, in other ways things are kind of falling into place for the Celtics. The Cavaliers have injury issues. They're obviously struggling in their series. So yeah, it's almost like, well, now their top challenger is hurt, is hobbled. I think they're better than the Knicks. We know they're better than the Pacers, at least talent wise. So yeah, on the flip side, as much as sky might be falling, you also got to look at it like, yeah, the circumstances are pretty much falling into place.
Yeah, they just have to like get by. That's why it was big for them to get those 5 days off after the Magic series. Like, I just don't think they can afford a long series. Like, I think they need to find a way to either gentleman sweep or six game against the Knicks. Same thing in the next round. Like, I just don't know if they can withstand like one or two grueling series before getting to the finals. Like, I just don't know if they'll hold up.
And, and I think it's kind of also worrisome that you say, well, they just got to get by, because like there's nothing inspiring about that as a fan. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you're not going in like, oh, I believe they can win. You're like, oh, I think we just need to get by and we can win. We can back into a championship. It's like, oh well, all right, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I know. It is. I just again, the problem was that I think the stuff that was bad in that first game is stuff that I don't know how much better it's going to get. Like I'm sure they're going to make an adjustment for game two, and they're not going to leave themselves exposed on those switches on Brunson in the fourth quarter as bad. Um, I have to believe they'll shoot better. Um, But it's just I do, and yeah, it's not like an inspiring way, but I do think it's just like it's kind of survival mode right now. The good thing is like they're talented enough where like they can play survival mode and still gentlemen sweep you. Um, but like again, I just like I worry like Brown does not look good. So I just wonder like what's he gonna look like, and if he has to play this many minutes because what the rest of the lineup looks like, what's he gonna look like if they make it to the finals? Um, when you have teams that are much better than the Knicks but can play that style and make the Celtics uncomfortable. Like, everybody looked at that Magic series and said, wow, they really got up in the Celtics' face. They made them uncomfortable, made them play on their terms. They just weren't good enough to win. And I think the Knicks had a similar playbook in game one. I just don't know if they're good enough to carry it through a 7-game series and beat the Celtics 4 times. But I do think teams like the Nuggets and the Thunder are good enough to make the Celtics similarly uncomfortable, but finish the job over a long series. Um, so I don't know. I'm worried about the Celtics.
Well, once they do right the ship, Joe Mazzulla will be sure to tell Gary Washburn that he knew it all along.
You hate Joe Mazzulla.
So, so that kind of takes us into the behind the keyboard segment. I give Gary Washburn a lot of credit because I think Joe Mazzulla has, through his saltiness, made a lot of the reporters reticent to ask him any game related questions, and Gary keeps doing it, so that's to his credit.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes I wonder with coaches and managers what they think their their job entails when it comes to the media, because there does seem to be this like how dare you question me sort of attitude from it, um, and even with Cora as it's related to the Devers stuff, um, specifically with Cora, you want to remind him, hey, listen, man, like you were out of the sport, like you were persona non grata, so I want you to remember, like you're you still have kind of that mark on you.
Yeah.
And Missoula, he inherited kind of a ready-made team, and yeah, he managed to fulfill the job. But I guess kind of like what is rubbing me at the moment.
It ain't me.
I don't want to say rubbing me the wrong way. It's just it's a rub.
What's rubbing you the right way?
It is that you're the manager or the coach of a premier professional sports franchise in a city that cares, which is a luxury that 80% of your brethren don't have. Shout out to the Cincinnati Reds, manager. But when things like this happen, when the team is 500, when the team loses a playoff game to a team that is probably not better than you, the questions come. They're part of the territory, and I get that you can be irritated, you can be frustrated, whatever it might be, but to not expect those questions or to think that they are unfair simply because they are being asked, it strikes me as kind of not understanding the realm of professional athletics.
Yeah. My feelings on all this have evolved like over the years, and it does like what my sort of take in this or for this segment it kind of overlaps with yours a little bit. So like I'll kind of like lump it in is like I do think it is the role of the media, to be the sort of that conduit between the team and the fan, to get them that information. Otherwise, it's just state media, and that doesn't serve anyone. I do think sometimes maybe some reporters like assume they speak for the fan more so than they actually do. Like I think there's a difference there. Like you can be the medium between the two, but that doesn't mean you always speak for the fan, you know. Um, and I think that maybe happens too often. But on the one hand, like yeah, I think some of the coaches are too obnoxious. Belichick, top example, obviously, and we know how he felt because we've seen his email now, and we saw I think in the Dynasty series how Ernie Adams said me and Bill called them the scribes because they're just a bunch of people with no idea what they're talking about, and I know he looked down on the media for that. Um, And that is a bad way for him to look at it because like it is part of the job and you got to treat people with respect and at least meet them halfway. But the other side of that is like sometimes the media really doesn't know what they're talking about. And I think that's true maybe more often than we would like to admit. And I think part of that is like, listen, I mean, I think there's an insecurity with a lot of people in the industry, and myself included, that like, there's not much job stability, right? So if you acknowledge that you're what you don't know much and you're replaceable, it doesn't help you keep a job, right? Um, and there's also ways for the athletes to get their message out now. They don't really need the reporters, right? So there's a lot of like sort of fear and trepidation. So I think there's this like defense mechanism where a lot of reporters sort of like really want you to believe that they're the authority or that they know what they're talking about. And in some cases, certainly they do. But and a lot of times they don't. I think that's especially true in football, right? Like the reality is, especially in football, we most of us have absolutely no idea what's going on. There are obviously some people who pour over the film and they really become experts. And God knows, like I made my best effort to sort of get to that point when I was on the beat, but like it's hard. Like football is like a college course, and especially if you didn't grow up playing it, which I didn't. Like there's a big gap you got to bridge there. And if you don't get to that level, at some point, at some level, you are speaking and asking questions from a point of ignorance, like almost by default. And then it becomes like, what kind of coach do you run into? Do you run into one like Bill who calls you on it nonstop and just sort of hates you, or do you run into one who understands you have a job to do, and treats you with respect and dignity? Do you have one who's kind of like in between, which feels like what Missoula is? Um, but I do think there is an element of like a lot of the people covering the team don't know as much as they think they do. I think that is especially true with the Red Sox too. I think there's a lot of people that just say things that cover the Red Sox or commentate on the Red Sox. Maybe it's more true in the talking head side of things. Um, but a lot of people say things with just with total certainty and they're way off. Um, and I don't know. So I don't begrudge people like Missoula for getting grumpy about it, but I still think there's a way to handle it better than the way he handles it.
Well, but that's what I separate questions differently. If I am one of those decision makers, like a Missoula, uh, questions are should be valued because that's someone who, if it's a sincere question, like as a fan, I'm watching the game. If I want to know why Cora didn't sacrifice in a certain situation, um, I, that's where I kind of want the beat writer to ask, not just be like, just out of curiosity, why did you not think to sacrifice in that situation? Um, that's a opportunity for the coach to explain. It's not necessarily the reporter. It could be. It's not necessarily the reporter trying to say this was a dumb decision. It's like, hey, this was a decision that was made. Can you provide clarity for that? And the football is the number one example of this. I mean, how many Twitter, YouTube warriors claim to know how to, break down a cover three defense, which they don't. But if someone's asking Bill Belichick, like, how come you considered this or that, like, that person is not necessarily trying to prove how smart they are. They might be. Sometimes some of those questions are designed or phrased to make you just show off how smart you are. But a question is different in that way. A question is that opportunity to inform, educate, for both the listener and the rest of the audience.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And Belichick was interesting because you know, as much as he just like he clearly hated the media or the majority of media, there were some people who he did respect. You could tell. And when he thought it was a good question or an interesting question, um, he would tell you, like literally, he would say, "That's a good question." And like he's one of the few guys where I think he meant it. He didn't just like say it. And oftentimes it wasn't a question that was like probing him about an injury. Why didn't you do this? What about this? Or someone coming in there trying to like act like they know everything about cover three or different pin and pull blocking and all this kind of stuff. It was like two of my favorite Belichick answers were very simple questions that he went on a long time for, and it was the famous long snapper rant for 10 minutes, which like it was a great question by Ben Volin, because I think it was sort of from the perspective of a fan where it's like, I'm not trying to disrespect long snappers, but I'm just wondering why not cross train somebody and save the roster spot? Like, how hard is it? Why do you need a roster spot? He wasn't asking it in a disrespectful way. He was genuinely curious. And I think Belichick detected that. He was like, I can see why people wouldn't know that. And then he talked for 10 minutes, right? And then there was a really good one I remember where Bob Sochi asked, why have you what kind of benefits do you, because we see like throughout the offseason and into early parts of training camp, the Patriots especially would be signing guys from like the USFL or the CFL or these independent leagues. And it's like, why do that? They're not going to make the roster. We all know they're not going to make the roster. Why do that? So was there a reason behind it? And Belichick, like, he had a twinkle in his eye. Like, he loved that question because it made sense. Like, and he talked about how it's because all these guys have been playing in the spring and they're ready to hit the ground running in these training camp practices where we need people who can go out there and not screw up. Like, if we're going to like actually make progress in these practices, we need people who are fresh, aren't in bad shape, have, are like kind of well oiled at this point and can go out there and help us, you know, accomplish the things we need to. And it was really interesting. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I just, even someone like him, like there were questions he liked. But I just think he sort of scoffed at it if he ever detected that the reporter was trying to act like they know more, they were experts in football. Because the reality is, I mean, maybe this is too high of a number, but I would say like at least 90% of like football reporters are suffering from some level of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Like we all, like most of us, I certainly did at times, like no doubt about it. It's hard not to, like, especially at the beginning. And you just, then it's at that point on you to work as hard as you can to not have that be the case. Right.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. That's a good point. Again, just to get back to the question, my feeling as a teacher, as a parent, as a coach has always been, you can't get angry at someone for not knowing something if you refuse to tell them. So, you can't get angry at the media for being
Yes.
ignorant if when they ask, you get
And,
angry at them for asking. So,
and I do think, like,
yeah.
to your point, there's an important distinction between, and I think the line gets blurred too much in Boston, especially.
Yeah.
There's a difference between questions, like that need to be asked, and like your general commentating talking head thing. And I think that line gets blurred too much, and I think maybe the coaches blur that line too much, where they forget that the people in front of them after each game in practice are not Felger and Maz. Like, they're not coming at it necessarily with the same agenda.
Yes. And next time we have Logan back on, I think a good topic for this would be stupid questions, because he has said one of his things he has a bug up his ass about is reporters asking stupid questions. I'm actually a huge fan of stupid questions. I think there's a gigantic value to stupid questions. I actually think smart questions are the ones that piss me off more. Or ones that are supposed to are trying to sound smart. I think that those questions are useless. I just have one last thing. I noticed you have the Pats book behind you. I actually just finished reading Felger's book. Have you ever read that one?
I've not.
So it's an interesting book because it's not quite a history of the Patriots. It's not like supposed to be an exhaustive. I think it's like 200 pages, but it was written. I think it was written after their second Super Bowl, and it's just stories from the basically from like the Carroll era and older. And it's very interesting to read the stories from that time because there were some like they were a mess of a franchise, and the stories about it are from that era are like they've they've been played up now, like how bad they were before Belichick, mostly by Belichick himself. But like they did have a couple like really good years and some very good like players and stories, and it was interesting to look at them like before the lens of the dynasty had totally kind of wiped them off the face of the earth. So if you can find that, I would recommend reading it. And it's also interesting because like Belichick was still a person. Like Belichick wrote I think he wrote the epilogue, the afterword, whatever it's called. Um,
In the book?
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And so it's like it's an interesting snapshot of a time we're never gonna get back. Like that was like before Brady was Brady. before Belichick was Belichick. But it was after the franchise was no longer just an afterthought. Um, so it is interesting if you can track it down. I think I got it from like the library or something like that. But no, it's pretty good, so I recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, not to make this a Felger episode, but like you talk about someone who would have some good insights for this particular segment. Like, you know, he, I think I was listening to that show somewhat recently, and they were having a discussion like the times where they, had someone storm out of an interview. I think they were reacting to the Belichick Jordan Hudson thing, like their most uncomfortable interview moments, or if there was a blow up or something, and you know. I think it was like Maz and Bedard and whoever else were like they had a couple, but nothing too crazy. And then like Felger had like dozens because he was such a
He
shit
was doing
stirrer
his
when he
job.
was when he was on the beat. And to your point, like part of the it's a good way to do the job, but so I don't doubt that he's got a lot of really good stories from that time with the Patriots. This book is actually written by Glenn Stout and Richard Johnson, and it's like a history of the Patriots. And I like had dinner with this is embarrassing to admit, but I had dinner one time with one of the two. I just can't remember now because it was 5 years ago. And he's like, I wrote this book, and he gave it to me. And now I don't remember which one he was, but he was a nice guy,
He
and he gave
didn't
me that
sign
book.
it.
No, no, because I was getting dinner with someone else who works in Boston media, and I never met the guy before. He came over and sort of joined us and told me about that. And I don't know why I can't remember if it was Glenn Stout or Richard Johnson now. Regardless, it's a good history on the Patriots, yeah.
Okay, might check it out.
And to your point, it kind of reminds you that you know whether they were good or not, the pre-Brady history is interesting.
Yeah, right.
Like
It
there's a
is.
lot of interesting stuff that happened, whether that was the Parcell years or in the '80s. Like a lot of it is interesting. There's a lot of meat on that bone.
The machinations behind how Kraft got the team
Yeah.
is legitimately interesting and a reminder that he is a good businessman. At least he was a good businessman at one point in time.
Yeah,
So
and what was they were going to be the Bay State Patriots, and they nixed it because then it would have been the BS
yeah,
Patriots, and he was pissed at the city or whatever. All that kind of stuff I love.
yeah, yep. That's all I got. You got anything else for today?
No, other than I think the Utah Mammoth logo sucks.
Oh,
You're
I'm
a Utah guy, so I don't know. I don't know.
no, not the hockey team. I mean, the hockey team didn't exist when I was growing
Yeah,
up, so there's no like affinity that I have for it. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I am not the biggest fan of that because it's contributing to the Jazz moving out of Salt Lake City, most likely, to like a not out of Utah, but out of downtown Salt Lake City and moving out to one of those mega sports megaplexes that every team is building now. And I'm a big fan of downtown arenas, and I thought that arena was a great arena for a long time because it was a basketball specific arena. It wasn't one of these multi-sport retrofitted ones. The fans were right on top of you. Like it was a good arena, and it is a good arena. And now they're gonna be playing out by the old mines or something like that. So
it is true. I hate like a really bad one. I think, and you spent time in Philly, I think, so you would be able to say is the complex in Philadelphia, right, where it's all three are like 25 minutes outside the city in like a gigantic parking lot. I drove out that way one time, and I was kind of surprised that they were all out there. I'm like, this sucks, And then you contrast it with Pittsburgh when it's like all of them are right there, all three are right there downtown, which is like an incredible experience. Like I'm with you. I've never been to Salt Lake, so I have no idea what that dynamic looks like. But if it is like what you're saying, that would be a bad change.
Philly is great if you're a 22-year-old looking to drink, or you're commuting in driving in from South Jersey. That's why that complex is great. And those are the two ways that I generally went down to that facility, so I liked it. But now I have had that thought, like when I go back to Philly, I'm like, oh yeah, should I take the kids to a Phillies game? And then I'm like, oh god, I have to deal with all that crap. And yeah, so there's definitely a limit to the appeal of that, that there isn't with a downtown
Well, it'll be interesting to see with the Celtics, right? Because I think we're barreling towards a reality in which they make a new arena, and it's like, they're going to run into all these Boston city politics, but it's like, so what are the options, right? Everett or the Seaport area, but like if they can't get that done, like are they going to put it like to your point, like out in a Foxborough 2.0 somewhere? I can't imagine that. Like the Celtics have to be downtown, but it's not much real estate. I don't know how they're going to do that. I don't know how they solve that one.
Yeah, I mean the Garden is no great shakes as a facility, but if they're in Everett or the Seaport, I will never go to a Celtics or Bruins game. Not out of any sort of like opposition to that. Like I'm getting to Everett is, jeez, might as well
Well, that's what it's interesting that
might as
I
well
feel
go to
that's
the London game.
I I feel that way about the Celtics being there. I feel the opposite about like if the Revolution finally go there. And like that if I lived in Boston, that's how I would feel. I'd be like, I will go to those Revolution games because like it's probably gonna be cheap. I can take the subway there. The game at most is gonna be like 2 hours. I can get out with plenty of time to still go drink my face off and have fun. Um, but yeah, the idea of like going all the way out there for the Celtics, I don't know, feels weird.
Yeah,
And I hate the Seaport.
the Seaport stinks. It
Like just a
blows.
fake community. Like I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. I mean, I get it. Like it's nice, but I don't know. I hate areas like that. Like no personality, no like manufactured history. Reminds me of like Celebration, Florida. Have you ever been there? When Disney
Yep.
tried to make its own town with
Yeah,
a
man.
fake history, and it's like this doesn't work.
Yeah.
So,
Wide ranging behind the keyboard today. But Dakota, thank you very much for fitting us in. I hope that the carburetor on the mower cooperates. Um,
I
and
hope
we've
you
got
find something to rub you the right way.
and we've got a couple more episodes with you, right? Like you're
Yeah. I,
okay.
yeah. I start my new job May 19th. Um, so I'm gonna keep. I'm still gonna keep trying to come on here and fire off wild takes if I can. Um, so we'll just have to see how the scheduling works out. But yeah.
Awesome. Cool. All right. For Dakota, not for Logan. This has been another episode of the NPC Sports Podcast. Thanks for being with us. My name has been Ben, and have a lovely week.